morning. We are busy with the economics lesson from the NSSC syllabus of Namibia, and we are busy with 2.1 on the syllabus, and we still discuss the business types. We do the last part of private sector firms. We will cover multinationals, and we will also look at informal firms, which I also believe is part of this, because it is a private person that start up this informal firm, but you can decide. So multinationals and informal firms, and then we will look at one public sector firm, and that will be the nationalized industries, or the parastatals as we call them. Okay, remember I've said it's always good to recall information from the previous lesson. Now here is a question, like I've said, give me 3 differences between a private limited company and a public limited company that we have covered in the previous lesson. Look for differences between them. They like to ask that type of question. Okay, so before I continue, I have now the slide on where you see all the business types. So please look at the amount of times I use public. What public did I use so far? I've used public sector, so there I use public. Then I use public limited companies, which is not part of the public sector, which is a private sector firm. And then I will use, as an example of a public sector firm, a public corporation. So you see 3 times they are public. So the word public is used. Please don't get confused. Students often get confused. And then if I use public limited companies, then they think it's part of this. But remember, companies is private sector firms. So don't get confused, please. It is very important. On the slides, you will see I've highlighted them all in yellow, that you can see the public appear often. Okay, the features of a multinational. Multinationals is normally public limited companies, because multinationals is very big. They need lots of capital, and that's the only time they can get, the only way they can get so much capital together is by selling shares on stock exchanges. If I tell you what a multinational is, you will understand why I said they need lots of capital. They are operating all over the world in different countries. Their headquarters is normally in a developed country. Don't have to be, but it is normally. Like in our case, where you have a multinational like Namibian breweries, which operate in different countries, there is headquarters in Namibia, and Namibia is a developing country. That's why I said normally. But if you look at a product like Coca-Cola, their headquarters is in America, and they have branches all over the world. So that is a good example of a multinational. Why do they operate in different countries? They look for new clients, new demands, new markets. If they start in other countries, it reduces their transport costs, because you don't have to transport the Coca-Cola products that they produce in boxes from America to Namibia. They produce it here, and they perhaps send the raw materials and so forth if we can't get it here. So that is cheaper to distribute it to the clients. They can save on the cost. They look for favorable conditions to produce in, where it is, for example, safe, close to raw materials, cheap labor, that type of thing they are looking for if they produce in other countries. It's not only to look for a market, it's obviously that is part of it. They are they like to start up in developing countries because they can get all these benefits like cheap labor when they start up their factories and businesses in developing countries. But the benefits that developing countries get from them is that they train their workers and they teach them how to produce this type of product. So they share their know-how with the developing countries. Okay, we have looked at the benefits developing countries get from multinationals, or we have looked at a few. And we have looked at disadvantages that they, to attract them, the government normally will offer tax reductions to them or other forms of rebates. If you train our workers, we will give you a rebate, or we will give you grants to do so. Negative point is that profits are normally, after they pay tax, they take the profits back to their headquarters. So that is not so good. It is mostly not invest back into the country. It increased the output of our country a lot because it is products produced in our country, so it will increase our GDP. We will later on talk about what GDP is. Okay, disadvantages of a multinational you can pick up now. You can see you can bring in products which they dump in our countries because they can't sell it in their own country because there's an oversupply, say, of butter in the Netherlands. Now they come and sell it here. Or tin fruit in France, and they can come and sell it here in the developing countries. So they dump low quality products sometimes in developing countries. And then they don't regard laws of the country always when it comes to the environment and the resources. So they will say, for example, misuse our resources or damage our environment. And if the country, the government then talk to them about it and say it's not according to our country's laws, they will say, but then we will leave. And that will mean that 3,000 workers will be out of a job. So you see, they have a little bit of control over the government. Okay, and then they operate in more than one country, so they can spread the risk. If they see that in this country you pay more tax on this specific part of the production process, then they move it to another country. Or we get too much trouble with this from the government, then they move it to another country. So that is to their benefit, but not always to our country's benefit, because we may rely on their income and then they decide to do that. They exploit our cheap labor. That is a negative point. And they also normally don't apply to minimum wages in the country. And we have examples of Ramatex that have moved after the country had more, that have put a lot of pressure on them to pay their workers more than or at least the minimum wage. And there was a lot of workers without a job. The last negative point is that they take their profits after paying tax. Some of the multinationals, like Rossing Uranium, have developed, say, the schools in the area, the health services in the area, some roads and so forth. So some companies do put money back into the country. Here we have examples of homework. They advise on the advantages of multinationals to a country, not only to the government, but also to the business itself and to the citizens in a country. So you can see if you are part of a multinational or staying close to it, you can use their clinics. And that will be, for example, an advantage. Explain what a multinational is about. And on that, they can test you 5 points that you tell them what a multinational is. Okay, and we look at a public corporation. Remember, that is the example of a public sector firm. They also call them parastatals or nationalized industries. The owner wholly or partly is the government. The government appoint a board of directors. Their aim is not to make profits, to improve the welfare of everyone in the country. And they do it by providing services mostly, like married goods and public goods, which we will also cover later on. Then there's lots of examples that you can offer on public sector firms like Nampower, for example, that provide electricity. Then the last one we do that I have said to you is informal firms. This is the person sitting on the corner and selling fat cakes, or the person walking in the street or sitting on a corner and selling a newspaper, for example, or newspapers, or selling fruit to other people, or selling wooden art. This is his own business. But why he is part of the informal firm is because he is registered nowhere. The Ministry of Trade and Industry don't know about him. He is not registered, and that means he also don't pay tax. This type of business form is very, or exists a lot in countries like our country where the unemployment rate is very high, because that's the only way of earning the income. Okay, we have examples. Give 3 examples of an informal firm. Give 3 examples of a multinational in our country, or 3 examples of public corporation. That for each of them, you can ask 3 points, and then look at the disadvantages if a firm becomes so big that they lost control actually. And look at that if you can come up with answers of why it is to a disadvantage if a firm becomes too big. Okay, there I have exam and test questions. Why will a business decide to change from a closed corporation to a public limited company? Why will they do that? And you can look for 6 points if you can get that together. And then the second question is, discuss why multinational firms is mostly public limited companies, as I've said. Give a reason for that. You can look for 4 points there. And why do you think it is the benefit of Bank Windhoek to change from a private limited company into a public limited company, which they have done a few years ago?